What my former colleague had brought in to combine with that was the audience being the North Star. More recently, my colleague Nicole Laporte and I wrote a cover story for the Most Innovative Companies issue on LeBron James's company, the Spring Hill Company, and how they've built this like hub of really purpose-driven around the idea of empowerment. To me, that exemplified what every brand should be looking for in how they create content, or how they should think about creating content for their audience.
TikTok, the next YouTube, or always somewhat niche?
Oh no, not niche. Whether it's the next YouTube or not, it's a monster.
Yeah.
It has to start somewhere. It has to start sometime. What better place than here? What better time than now?
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the latest edition of the Radcast. Hey guys, what's up? It's Ryan Alford. Welcome to the latest edition of the Radcast. I got a good one today, folks. You know, being in the industry, marketing and advertising and business for right at 20 years, I'm going to age myself, and it's my birthday. 44 years old, Jeff Beer. But a staff editor for Fast Company, a long admired publication and media giant. I'm really excited to have Jeff Beer, who is the staff editor with them. What's up, Jeff?
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Love it, man. It's we interview and have a lot of people on the show that are, you know, in business in general and in marketing and all that. But one of the first that I can recall that are so, you know, ingrained in the business side and the writing side and the understanding the story side of advertising, marketing, and branding, which I know you write for Fast Company. Really enjoyed reading and getting to know some of your stories behind the scenes. I'd read a few, not knowing they were yours until I met you. But thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, no, of course. Thanks. Yeah, pleasure being here.
Let's start right down the path. So we have a lot of our audience is pretty diverse in business and marketing and all that, but maybe we start by talking a little bit about, you know, Fast Company and what you do for them, you know, maybe intermixed with, you know, some of your background and what brought you there, you know, and you know, kind of your journey to get there.
Yeah, no, sure. So Fast Company, if for anyone who doesn't know, is just is a business magazine that sort of sits, I think tradition's been around for like 25 years. I think that was last year. They celebrated their 25th anniversary. It sort of sits in the pocket between like hardcore business magazines like a Forbes or a Fortune and like tech magazines like Wired. Like it's sort of always been in that in-between space. We definitely skew our audience. We skew younger and more diverse than a lot of our business publication competitors. The tagline for us is the future of business, which I think points us in a direction of both talking about what large global corporations are doing, but also small companies that are pushing the envelope, whether that's through their products or through their how they're affecting culture and society with what they do. And yeah, so I mean, when you think about the future of business, I mean, so we talk about and cover, you know, climate change and how business has a massive opportunity there. We talk about, you know, racial equality and injustice in the role of business, because I think we, you know, in a lot of ways we talk about business and technology and how in the context of culture in general, right? Like it's not in a vacuum. It's not like, oh, how's the stock price? Oh, that's the only thing that matters. How's the growth? That's the only thing that matters. Those aren't the only thing that matter. And so there's a lot of nuance and different aspects that go into it. So for me, I cover marketing and advertising, which I like because I don't have a necessarily a business background. I like it because marketing and advertising for most people, I think, is where they meet business, where business meets culture, where a business expresses itself and tells you who it is, not just what it makes. And so I find that kind of fascinating. How do we build how do you build, why are you a Pepsi guy and I'm a Coke guy? I'm just saying, like, whatever. Why is your dad a Ford guy and, your father-in-law a Chevy guy? There's these like emotional attachments that sometimes a lot of times it's through the quality of the product, but a lot of times it's, all things being equal, it's about that connection. So I find that fascinating.
You have to be a curious creature. You must. Like I always think about, the best editors and the best writers. I'm like, to uncover some of these things, and you must have a fascination or a natural born curiosity about you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly, have always kind of been a pretty voracious reader and wanting to know how things work. But like a lot of times for example, like, so in journalism, I got my start writing for snowboarding and skateboarding magazines. So like I was, and those worlds, this was many years ago, those worlds are brand centric. Like back in the 90s, like I could tell if you were standing in front of me and you were wearing, X, Y, and Z shoes, hat, I could tell what kind of music you listen to. I could tell, based on the brands that you were wearing. And, that's true to a certain extent today, but I think that idea of these weren't team sports, these were sports, these were cultures that were very brand centric, and the brands came from within those cultures. And I always, as I got older, started to think like, well, why did I gravitate towards, Volcom, for example, or Vans, or as opposed to, what's the one I didn't really like? I can't remember. Anyway, so like, well, why was that? And I find that curious. And so actually that got me, weirdly enough, it wasn't planned, but to get into business journalism. I'm from Toronto. My wife got into NYU grad school and we moved to New York, and I ended up talking to the editors at Advertising Age and talking about this background, talking about why I thought brands were interesting and why I thought the way brands talk to people was super interesting, and how much sheer money was spent on this and why. And anyway, that sort of got me in the door there. And that was back in 2006. So it was a while ago. And so ever since, I've sort of just been covering with a few detours along the way, but have been covering market advertising pretty consistently since then.
How does, I've always been fascinated by guys, girls like yourself that cover the industry as long as you have. And, like I've been in the industry, like in application of it, like how much knowledge you have to have compiled to date. And is the only difference is that, us guys that are in the advertising, we're just applying it daily, but in a way you guys are as well. You write about it. Do you feel like you could write a book about it that's high level, or do you feel like if you had to go run a marketing department, you could do it at this point? I always wonder how much application is being absorbed versus like, is it just the topic of the day? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I hear you. Yeah. Well, you know what? I think it depends a lot on the person. I personally have no ambition, and I have no ambition to run my own marketing company.
Right.
But I do think that having a arm's length relationship with, I'll say anything, but like when you're covering something and having the perspective of not being in it, like your livelihood depends on the work you're doing for your clients, right?
Yep.
Mine is about reporting what's going on. Part of my job is to, especially when I was at trade publications, I think trade publications, a lot of the goal there is you're a mirror. You're a mirror to what's happening in the industry. You're basically a historic. So when someone like you is starting out, you can go there and pretty much get a sense of what's going on in your industry and get a historical context by sort of going back and seeing what's been covered. After you've been covering these things for a while, you start to see cycles. You start to see, let's say trends, but you start to see approaches that work no matter what the trend actually is. The tool, whatever the tool is, you start to see approaches from brands and stuff that are successful no matter what that platform is. So, yeah, I mean, I may not have that vision, but it is interesting. I think about it. I think about it though, like in a way of what that relationship is, because I have had colleagues, like my first editor at Ad Age, Scott Donaton, it was just named, I'm going to screw up his title, but like head of content marketing or head of marketing at Hulu, like last week.
Yep.
But he wrote a book back in like 2000 and I want to say 5 called Madison and Vine, about the merging of the advertising world and the entertainment world. I had another former editor, Jonah Bloom, went on to be a president of Kirschenbaum Bond and Partners, I think. Yeah. Well, anyway, like plenty of colleagues that have gone on. My editor who hired me at Fast Company, Therese Etsy, was at Wieden and Kennedy for years, like afterwards. So like there have been plenty of jumps, but so I do think it does provide you with kind of like a unofficial, master's or PhD in this industry that you can't get otherwise. But I think it depends on the person. I did have an interesting conversation. I was asking one of my former colleagues, one of their workers. I met them up with them one time, and there was a guy who had come up traditionally through an agency education, like agency industry career. And I asked him, I was like, well, what's this guy bringing from journalism, like from covering this to the actual day to day? And he had an interesting point. He said that, well, my perspective traditionally had been from like, what's the best for the client, which is great. Like, what's the best from the client? What can I do to help the client? That's the main goal. That's the North Star. It's like, he said what my former colleague had brought in to combine with that was the audience being the North Star.
Yep.
So the consumer, which, I mean, this to me right now, this was a number of years ago, but I hope this is somewhat commonplace now, but like that was to him, as someone who had been, working in advertising for a number of years, a fresh perspective to have in the room.
Couple things done. You went right down a couple paths that are, we tell clients all the time, and I tell clients, like, you hire me to understand your consumer. You don't hire me to make you happy. And, that is the dynamic. And ironically, we're doing this right now, the Radcast, it is a media entity. Like, it creates content, like, in a way. And a lot of agencies or brands are creating media companies, within themselves. And so you've got this fascinating, I think, cross-pollination going on with the media itself and, entities like that. So there's, a few things there that are certainly hot and heavy at the forefront of the industry.
This is my dog. I think he's knocking at my door.
Oh, we've had cats on. We've had Lockhead. Christopher Lockhead was on. His cat jumped on the thing. What was his name? Bean. Oh yeah, we've had many of animals. We welcome all animals on the Radcast.
Nice. It's interesting what you're saying. I think you're right about the brands as media companies. That was a very common sort of phrase, I would say, on the sort of conference circuit for a number of years.
Yep.
But what it really comes down to is, and a lot of brands will say they want you to be their eyes and ears for what consumers and what people want. But it really comes down to, you can tell by some of the work that there's a difference between the clients and the brands that say it and the brands that mean it. And sometimes they say they want you to be that person, but they actually do want you to be the person who makes them happy. And sometimes that's clear in the work. And I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with agency folks where they're like, yeah, talk about difficult clients that, it's all good and ambitious and optimistic at the beginning of a relationship. But sometimes obviously they're under their own pressures, but, it's tough for brands sometimes to navigate that, because ultimately, I think many are wary, either an individual, whether it's a CMO or just collectively, of risk, of trying things, and that can be having that lack of control can be discombobulating for a lot of people.
We try to cross that bridge before we even get to it. our fucking name is Radical. You didn't hire Radical to do what you were always doing.
Right.
It doesn't always work, Jeff, but we at least try to cross the bridge before we even start the battle.
At least we put it over the door.
Exactly. But let's talk a little bit about you, man. I want to talk about some of your favorite stories, that you've written, most recently, maybe in, your whole history, but definitely with Fast Company and things like that. Anything that really stands out to you as, whether, most recent or even lifelong, some of your most favorite stories that you've been able to tell?
Yeah, sure. I'll say I've written over the years, I've built up a number of different stories, but I do enjoy writing about Patagonia because I think it's a company that, with little exception, really is an example of, whether you agree with them or not, is a company that sort of puts who it is out there, knows who it is, and acts accordingly, both, from everything from its supply chain to the films it makes. And that's how I sort of got into the company, was actually through its film work, because of obviously covering market and advertising. But, I've written a couple of features with them and talked with the founder, Yvon Chouinard, a few times, and just a really fascinating place, the way they've been able to push both themselves and their sort of the apparel industry and the outdoor industry when it comes to sustainability and frankly quality of content. So there's been a couple of features there. We had a cover story 2 years ago with Yvon Chouinard, talking to him about capitalism and how climate change and business just don't mix, and how he sort of balances running a business while also trying to improve the planet. And just a fascinating guy at 80 something years old. More recently, my colleague Nicole Laporte and I wrote a cover story for the Most Innovative Companies issue on LeBron James's company, the Spring Hill Company, and how they've built this hub of really purpose driven around the idea of empowerment company, whether that's through the marketing or the films and TV they produce, or the podcasts, or it's a separate entity, obviously, because it's a NGO, it's a charity, but the More Than a Vote initiative. I mean, just a fascinating group of people. I mean, obviously LeBron and Maverick Carter are the face, but then the way they run it, I mean, Maverick Carter is and even LeBron to a certain extent are very much in the day-to-day more than you would think, but the people they have there are super interesting, talented folks. And that was just a great story to be able to sort of dig into.
When you get to work with entities as big as Patagonia, as big as LeBron James, and I use the word entity, we're talking about a brand and a person, but LeBron James is a brand, obviously. But how much interaction do you end up having when you have stories with names and brands like this, directly with them, and maybe how is a second part to that, how much maybe follow up after you write the story? Do you ever hear back from them, or you get comments? So I'd love to hear kind of perspective on both of them.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. I know what you mean. We'll take the LeBron story, for example. That was, it was a tough one. He was in the middle of a COVID NBA season. Yeah. We were writing that. So we basically, how that story came about was, or how we put it together was, we basically talked to everybody else first. Yep. Right. Then we talked to Maverick Carter, who was also incredibly busy. And so we did get a couple different sessions with them. And then we had one session with LeBron, one hour long Zoom call with LeBron for that story. And they're usually open for and I've talked to him before. I think it depends on off-season, because I've had things that were much smaller than this feature story that they've made LeBron available to talk about. Like,
Yep.
I think a few years ago, it was like his nature of his investment in Blaze Pizza. Like as an entrepreneur, I talked to him about that, but that was like off season and it was a little easier. So they're definitely available. And the afterwards, I mean, sometimes it depends on the story, right? Like,
Yeah, right. I figured.
sometimes you hear good things, sometimes you don't. I mean, I certainly, this was a most innovative company's story. So we're obviously,
was it shock talk or shock writing or
right. It wasn't a takedown. Obviously, this was a celebration of what they're doing and how they, and more importantly, trying to show some insight to our readers of how they do what they do.
Yeah.
They were very appreciative of that, and they spread it on their social and all that, which was great. But other times, you do get some
critique.
We were disappointed to, not with this story, but other stories. If I've reported on what a company's doing, I mean, my coverage sort of mixes between straight reporting on brand X is doing thing Y and here it is, and here's the context around it, to a little more analysis where someone's doing something and my sort of opinion is in there as well. And that's usually when I get the emails. But to be fair, I do try to be as I try to be as fair as possible. Like it's almost like if you and I disagreed on a sports team or a certain player on a team, like you thought he was playing well, I don't think he's playing well, but we don't hate each other at the end of that debate. We just disagree, fundamentally disagree. That's kind of how I try to approach it. I try to be respectful and fair. And usually they'll be like, I'll get emails that are like, didn't expect that, but maybe next time, you're like what we do. And that's all you can hope for. I try to, I did do some sports reporting when I was first starting out. And one of the pieces of advice, and I think this is should be true across all media, is this guy, he was covering the Blue Jays anyway. And he said, if you criticize a player or a coach or the team, you have to show up the next day. Like you don't have to you just have to be there. If someone wants to get in your face or have a conversation about what you said about them, you need to be available. You can't hide behind, your access or up in the press room or whatever. And I think that, if someone emails me or calls me about anything I write, I'm all ears. I'm more than happy to explain my position or whatever. But it does happen, and that's cool. That's part of it.
What's the balance for you and Fast Company? Being in the position that you are, and the respected entity that is Fast Company, of the LeBron James, the Patagonia stories, versus maybe the lesser known. I mean, I know it's the future of business, and that sometimes crosses the path of the nobodies versus the somebodies, yet. But what's the balance of that from a story? Because look, you're a media company, and big names sell. Let's be honest. But at the same time, and I have seen this from Fast Company, so it's a little bit of a leading question because I know you do cover this, but I am curious the decision process and the evaluation of big name story versus context, all of those things. What are maybe some of the variables that we wouldn't know that go into those decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that that what you said is exactly right. I mean, obviously the magazine is one thing. I'm just going to sort of separate two things. The magazine, we have I may screw this up. We have 6 or 7. It's sort of adjusted over the last couple of years, but we have 6 or 7 print issues a year. So that is just like sort of say a tent pole of the brand, that comes out.
Yeah.
But the cycle of our coverage is online, right?
Yep.
So the magazine's a bit different because especially now, I believe almost every issue is anchored by a program like Most Innovative Companies, Most Creative People in Business, innovation by design, these kinds of things, which, and this applies to those programs as well. I think our goal is to both report on and reflect what the big brands and companies that people know and are interested in, what they want to know about those companies and brands. At the same time, want to celebrate and shine a spotlight on maybe the smaller players that are doing things that bigger players and everyone else can maybe learn from.
Right.
So, I'm trying to think of a specific example in the ad marketing recently. I know when it was smaller, it's obviously a bigger company now, but I've been sort of writing about their content for years. But like Yeti, for example, right? The cooler brand, right? This is, I mean, it's big in the cooler space, and it's but it's not Pepsi, right?
Right.
So, so 5 or 6, 7 years ago, they're creating these really cool little films that, it's a cooler. I mean, you could just look at a cooler and be like, "Why? How do we market this? What do we do?" But these people are telling, amazingly emotional, beautifully filmed stories about, outdoors people like hunters or skiers or, all this different cross section of the people who would use their product. To me, that exemplified what every brand should be looking for in how they create content, or how they should think about, creating content for their audience. It's not about necessarily, the actual thing, though it is, that's obviously a core thing, but it's about who they are as a company and as a brand. And, in that case, Yeti was about exploring and being the most you can be outdoors. So they were telling the most compelling, interesting stories of their, sponsored folks or just people they knew to illustrate, that possibility. And I think, you try to find that balance between reporting on the big guys and also using the smaller guys as inspiration for everybody else.
Yep. I like that. I think
that makes sense.
It does. It makes total sense. And it's kind of how I think of Fast Company in general, without even, hearing you reinforce certain things. Like, I think of it as inspiration, and if I, if I think the future of business, that makes sense. But for me, it's maybe the business inspiration. Is kind of where my mind went when I think about Fast Company. So it makes total sense, and it aligns at least with my own mental image of the brand. So I don't know.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
I know. What are some of the trends that are sticking out? I mean, covering advertising, marketing, branding, creative, everything that you cover. Are there things that are boiling over to the top that are like coming up over and over again, that are maybe even going past, maybe some of the up and coming stuff, or just repetitive, whether it's platforms or messages or things? I know we talked about, brands as media companies, a few years ago was like all the rage, and whether they've delivered that, we can argue that. But but I am curious if there's just things that just keep bubbling up that are just on your periphery every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, there's different, I mean, what do you say? You could just say, TikTok's big and NFT. Oh, if someone wants to do an NFT, that's ridiculous, but fine.
But to that end, though, I mean, is TikTok just going to be it is the raging video platform that started teenagers, and now you've got adults? It's like, in your mind.
No, sure. Yeah. I didn't mean it like that. I meant that I think that to me, the tools are one thing, but and then there's the approach to this multimedia world. I think the trend overall, it's like, look, your entire, just like us as people, our entire media budget is completely fragmented, right?
Yeah.
And you've got all these different places where you should be, I guess. But as brands go, I think it's interesting to see, I mean, a lot of what it is like, you're looking and you're watching, and you're seeing how brands are experimenting with a lot of these different platforms. I think that's great, but I think what it a lot of times it comes down to the ones who are like most successful, it seems, are the ones that like, anyway, I sort of touched on this earlier, but when you're talking about a company who sort of knows who it is and how it wants to put itself out in the world, and I don't mean this as a cookie cutter way, but then you can go out to all the different, then you can find the best people who are the most literate in each platform, like whether that's TikTok or Discord or Snap or whatever, that like to execute that. But first you need to know like what you want your voice to be in those areas. And I think that like sometimes you've got brands that are, it's almost like a person, right? Like you are on, I imagine you're on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, right? You're still you, but how you behave or how you communicate is a little different on each platform. And I think that the ones that get that have that consistency, and I feel like that's a big thing. Like brand consistency is something that I'm finding, whenever there's a screw up or someone does something just completely off, tone deaf or whatever, it's usually not consistent with what they're doing elsewhere. It's like, why is this company, I don't know, it'd just be weird to be one voice on Instagram and then have a completely different personality on Snapchat or TikTok or whatever.
Right.
These things where, and I think the consistency idea extends to nowadays. We could argue whether that's valid or not, but it extends to, the political parties a company donates to, the where it shows up in society. Like if I'm sort of blocking voting rights bills in Georgia and then putting a black square on my Instagram to say, I support all, you can't kind of do that anymore. You can't sort of do one thing on one hand. You can, I mean, obviously companies do, but I think it's less, you're more visible than ever before. So I think that consistency across all the platforms and just company behavior, how it treats its employees, there's not a lot of places to hide. And so that sort of consistency of behavior and knowing who you are is something that we're seeing a lot more of.
I totally unscripted, not that most of this is unscripted, but I have I know you cover these things. I want to see if you'll play along with me because you cover them. So I know you're probably forming somewhat of an opinion on them as platforms, sure. Right? How can I do a speed round of platforms and what seems to be overriding perspective, and you give either 1 or 5 words or less kind of responses. Are you game? Are you game?
Yes.
You're in. All right, here we go. I'm going to start with platform, and then I'm going to give you kind of a yin and yang of what seems to be the prevalence. Okay. Clubhouse, fad or rad?
You know what? I'm going to say rad fad in this because and I'll say that because this is more than 5 words, but I'll say the only reason
I actually can handle some context on Clubhouse.
Okay, this is what I'll say. This is what I'll say about Clubhouse. I think that it is super interesting, but I think that it could be a bridge app to, I mean, you look at just in the short time since it's become sort of a rad fad, that Twitter comes out with Spaces. Right. Discord last week came out with Stages Discovery or whatever it's called. Yep. Basically a Clubhouse challenger. So what happens to Clubhouse when you have these other platforms that already have a scaled user base that is much bigger? And I think that the idea that Clubhouse brings, or that the idea of that live audio connection is super interesting. And I don't think that'll go away necessarily. I do think it'll be interesting to see what happens to Clubhouse itself. Now, people said the same thing about Snap. So yeah, all bets are off. But I think that if pragmatically, if bigger players are recreating your essence of your product, you could be in trouble. All
right. So it's a gateway drug. It's marijuana, and you might do some heroin. I get it. All right.
I did not say that.
Not what you said. That was just my interpretation. Facebook on the way out or still growing? Still evolving. How about that? On the way out or evolving? Too big to fail. I'll throw a third one at you.
Yeah. I think maybe the third one, unfortunately. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
I think that, it's so prevalent. It's hard to see. And I don't mean this from a major brand perspective. I think you go anywhere, you're in South Carolina, I'm on the East Coast of Canada, like the amount of small businesses that rely on Facebook as their like public window to the world is staggering. So I do think that I'll say evolve. I'll go with the evolve one because I think, and not from their own volition. I think it's still going to be around and it will evolve, but it will evolve because hopefully it will be forced to evolve by regulation and because it's not going to evolve on its own in the sort of right way.
Would you lump, because they're owned by them, Instagram in with that same thing, or would you hold them a little bit of an outlier, at least being just a different platform?
From a business behavior and like sort of data privacy and all that, I would lump WhatsApp and Instagram in with them. As a consumer product, I think Instagram is much healthier, particularly with the younger audience. Though I was just reading this morning that, Gen Z is disproportionately on TikTok. Like TikTok's the thing. Instagram is much less popular, but I mean, as a product, I think Instagram is cooler, but but it's all part of the same problem as a company. So it's a complicated one.
Since you just brought them up, TikTok, the next YouTube, or always somewhat niche?
Oh no, not niche. Whether it's the next YouTube or not, it's a monster.
Yeah,
it's a monster. I think and just now, I think it was last week, they just they're introducing shoppable posts, so that'll be really interesting to watch. And there's I don't know. I just think it's such an interesting thing. There was a really great story. Who wrote it? It was in Bloomberg, and it was. Shelley Banjo at Bloomberg wrote a story called "How TikTok Chooses Which Songs Go Viral." I recommend everyone read it. It's basically tracks Megan Thee Stallion track and how Savage sort of became this massive thing. And spoiler alert, it wasn't organic. But it's fascinating just how vast and how tenacious their ground game is in promotion and manipulating the feeds. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. So and just the fact that everyone from middle school and up is like obsessed with it.
Now, I think
it'll be a monster.
Do you get in the vortex? I call it the vortex, the TikTok vortex. Do you get stuck in it sometimes? You go down the rabbit hole.
I actually don't use it that often because I know I'm just going to be like 20 minutes.
Time zap. You thought it was 2 and it's 27 minutes later.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that should tell you right there, right? Is it niche? Is that niche? No way.
I know it's not. Hey, some of these are leading. Hey,
I know.
What else? What am I leaving out? Any other good ones? What else is hitting your radar? Clubhouse has just been like, at least in my genre of, I do a ton of personal branding and everyone that seems to do that. It's like, and the big brands are coming, you're starting to see more of the transition, but it's, every coach and marketing guru and, everything else is kind of all over Clubhouse or has been the last 6 months. And, but it's a fascinating platform to me. For
sure. I would throw Discord in there.
Yeah, Discord, of course.
I think it's. I think what makes it really interesting to me is how there's no feed or likes or the familiar, say, metrics or behavior of other social platforms. And, they don't have advertising, but I think that's coming or in some form, especially with the new audio and video features. They certainly work with brands about like their presence on that platform. But I think, well, for this audience, I think it's also one of the more interesting ones because I think it's going to be one of the toughest ones for brands to break through and use effectively. Probably in a lot of the same ways that Reddit was challenging, because you have this really like the complexity and the sort of, passion of the communities there, and the sort of general vigilance against BS.
Yes.
You really gotta like.
I like that. I need to write that down. That's much more eloquent than I've been able to come up with. Cancel culture. Is that kind of what we're discussing?
Yeah, you got to be really. You got to be there. I mean, I think. And again, look, I'll go back to something. I say I don't want to talk in all broad strokes, but I think that the idea of Discord and how you show up there comes back to just that idea of who your brand is and how you want to show up in the world. And I think you can't just jump in to something, whether that's a social app or a social cause, without putting in the work or having the ground game first and like having sort of that cultural permission to be there. I've talked to a lot of CMOs that talk about that. Like not long ago, I was chatting with someone at Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah,
and you have this ice cream brand from like the whitest state in the U.S. Maybe not the whitest, but one of them.
Definitely up there.
And they are doing things that you would not necessarily expect from that company. It's ice cream. It's fun. It's, but, they're tweeting about, anti-racism, but at the same time, they're not just tweeting about anti-racism. I mean, this is a company that, has teamed with organizations. There was one recently where they successfully lobbied to, shutter a dilapidated jail in I think it was St. Louis that had been used to house people who couldn't afford bail. And like they're basically they're sort of partnering with organizations. They're doing sort of like I say, like the groundwork before they're doing the broad media stuff of like, hey, supporting stuff. Anyway, I think that also plays into how you show up on some of these platforms. Like it can't be superficial completely.
That brings up a good one. For me, I have a lot of people on. We've talked a lot about purpose marketing, purpose branding, the importance of that. And then I've had the other side of that coin with other people that are in e-com and kind of the Amazon type space and those kind of things, that there's an argument brewing, amongst marketers, not in public with general public, around if, yes, you can't be a complete sleazeball brand. Of course not in this today and age. Like you said, there's so much transparency and all these things. But the argument of the importance of having your purpose out there and having all those things, and people aren't going to buy from you, versus convenience and price. And, that's kind of been the purveyance of, well, when you're in it, certainly, I guess, have considered the more considered the purchase is, maybe the more it answers that question. But there's been this prevailing, not argument, but, I'll have that perspective, purpose. You have to have your purpose. You have to talk about your purpose. You have to have it out there. And then, but at the end of the day, they're in the line at the shopping center and they're buying that gum and they're not making sure that, you are involved with BLM or something, like.
Right.
What's your perspective on that?
100%. I hear you. And I think that is a completely valid discussion. I do think that it's not a zero sum game, right? Like I think that again, and I wouldn't even go back to saying you need to have a purpose. I just think you need to know who you are.
Yeah.
And if you're not about a certain social issue, and that's not something you want to be publicly out there or tied publicly to your marketing or whatever, hey, that's fine. But I think your brand can have a purpose of, we want to give people the best damn gum they've ever had.
Right.
We want to have the coolest packaging on that shelf that shows we're into, like, we're creative, and like, this is like, there's like one of those things where, and maybe it's just me, but like, if all things being equal, the convenience and the price, right, which is a lot of things are commodified that way, right?
Sure.
The price is the exact same. The company with the funniest, like me growing up, this is my, like, if there was a funny ad,
Yeah.
something made me laugh and I remembered it, or or maybe it is the packaging, but there's something that makes someone choose the one next to you over you, or vice versa. And if the price and the convenience is the same, what is your deal? Like, what are you giving people that, and I think there are so many things that are commodified like that. Generally speaking, obviously there's going to be like specials and discounts and yada, yada, yada. You can play that game, but, and you should, but like, when you're in those sort of commodified areas, like, part of it is like, these are who you are and how you show up is sometimes the only, I mean, if we're getting down to brass tacks here, is the only thing that separates, you from your competitor. So what is that? And it doesn't have to be, necessary. It doesn't have, you don't have to be way out front with climate change or whatever the issue is. It could be, if I knew a company treats its employees awesome, or like you think of like a company like Chobani or something, like they, or yeah, I don't know, like things like, I mean, for me, a lot of that, those yogurts, they're priced basically the same, or I don't know. I just think that there's so many areas where your price and convenience, and you can talk about that all day long and work really hard to get it better. But I think that is, if that's the only thing, I mean, you're basically a private label. Who are you?
That's right. If you haven't built your brand, then it doesn't mean anything to anyone. And I mean, I think that's what it comes back to, is the power
They'll
of branding.
leave you as fast as they came to you.
Yeah, that's true. And then I have this discussion sometimes, Gen Zs and millennials are changing everything because they're not turning into our parents. They care about the purpose and all this. And then, I see the progressive commercial that's like, don't become your parents. And I'm like, well, are they just going to become the parents, or are they really going to care about it forever? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I know. One we tackle every day, being, consumer driven and working with brands and things like that. So it's always a fascinating discovery, like, is it the mindset of today, or is it the mindset for forever,
Yeah, no, hey, if I had the answer, I'd be probably in a better tax bracket.
Jeff, as we close out here, what's the future for Jeff and Fast Company, and like, any passion projects on the horizon, or stories or things that you'd want to mention?
What's in the future? I was thinking that, I'm like, hopefully gainful employment.
Yeah.
Most honestly, I just want to keep progressing and improving as a journalist and a writer. I think that a healthy imposter syndrome is good for self-motivation. I've always been a printed word guy, and over the last year we've been sort of experimenting with a video series I do called Brand Hit and Miss of the Week, and so that sort of pushed me out of my comfort zone, and so I'd like to keep improving and pushing it there.
I like those. I watched them. I saw some of your most recent ones with Mountain Dew and talking about the commercials. I almost called it Hotter Now, but hit or miss. I do enjoy it. So if you're listening, you need to check out Fast Company's Instagram page. Hit or miss. Jeff does a great job with those. I actually did enjoy quite a few of those. I didn't know you did those, and
thanks. Yeah, my editor Lewis is the genius. He does all the text, and he's great. And then the only other thing I mentioned is we have upcoming issue in the fall, but I'm working on it right now. A series called Brands That Matter, and looking to highlight brands big and small that succeed in sort of setting out, like a lot of things we were talking about, setting out who they are, whether that's, who they are and their values, and embodying those through their products, policies, and marketing. So that'll be interesting. It's the first year for that. So that'll be fun to do. And yeah, other than that, just.
Have you picked them all out yet?
No.
Cool. I might send you a couple.
By all means.
Not even self-serving, more just, it might be helpful or not, might be on your radar. Yeah.
Great, man.
That's sweet. Well, where can everybody keep up with all things Jeff Beer, Fast Company, etc.?
I'll keep it easy. Fastcompany.com. and I'm on Twitter at Jeff C. Beer.
Sweet. Jeff C. Beer. You're funny on Twitter. I have been reading some of your stuff, and it's good. You fit in well with the Twitter crowd for sure. You've got to, and I say that in a good way, with the good side of the Twitter crowd. The trolls drive me crazy, but talking about the industry and perspective and things like that. So have enjoyed Hit or Miss, and look, guys, if you haven't read Fast Company, just Google Jeff Beer, Fast Company. You'll see all of his stories on advertising, marketing, branding, creativity, everything. It's really great work, and we really appreciate you coming on, Jeff.
No, I appreciate you having me. Thanks very much, Ryan.
Hey, guys, you know where to find us, theradcast.com. All of our content, all of the videos, all the highlights from this, you look it up, you find it there. Anything and everything. Instagram marketing, Fast Company. You can find all the highlights there, and we're at Instagram, the.rad.cast, and you know where to find me on all the platforms at Ryan Alford. We'll see you next time on the Radcast.